late 80s, a large hadron collider project began construction in Waxahachie, Texas. It was going to be the world's largest superconducting super collider, costing the U.S. billions of dollars. Unfortunately, the project was canceled in 1993, already costing the government millions of dollars. If we had kept going, imagine what could have been accomplished for America. This is our documentary on why it was canceled and what could we have accomplished.
I'm Bruce Brennick. I worked at Superconducting Super Collider from 1991 until 93 when it got voted down. I was part of a project management group whose responsibility it was to set up computer systems and help people make determinations about whether they should create the computer systems or procure the computer systems. I worked with a lot of groups. I've been doing computer work, systems analysis for probably 25 or 30 years.
Okay. So in 1993, the program was, you say, voted down, shut down. Why specifically, do you know specifically, was the program shut down, and what personally were your feelings about it, and why do you think that whole thing happened?
Okay. Well, I was disappointed. It was a project that needed national level funding. It was an international level project, and had it been accomplished, it would have done an awful lot to unite the scientific community worldwide. I think it got voted down for partially silly, partially not so silly political reasons. The silly political reasons were jealousy, because Texas had two major government-funded projects in them, and there were some states that didn't have any. There was a senator, I believe, Dale Bumpers from Arkansas, that made a personal vendetta against Superconducting Super Collider and pushed to get it done. But the other thing, from a practical point of view, was the funding came from Department of Energy, which was part of the U.S. budget, and the plan all along had been for other countries to contribute, but they never really bellied up. And it was increasingly being funded by the United States, and it depends on who you want to believe, who did what, when, where, why, and how, but those are the two key reasons. Lost political support, and there wasn't enough funding coming in from outside the United States.
What was your role in the Superconducting Super Collider project?
I functioned as a geodesist and land surveyor on the eastern portion of the project.
Why do you think that they chose Waxahachie as the location for the collider as opposed to any other location?
It was a political decision. Texas was one of several sites that was involved, and Waxahachie was better represented in Congress than any other site that was under consideration in Texas.
Could you explain your role more fully? Like, how did what you do fit into the project as a whole?
I was involved primarily in the routing of the collider itself and in the acquisition of the properties for the collider. Most of the properties to be acquired were not acquired on the surface, but on the subsurface, 110 feet below natural ground, and it was bought in fee simple, which is an absolute ownership, but it was below the surface of the earth.
Okay. How long did it take you to complete your portion of the project, or were you able to complete it before the project was canceled?
We were not complete when the project was canceled. We had finished probably 80 to 90% of the land acquisitions, but we had only constructed 17 miles of the collider at the time it was canceled.
Did you personally have any role in choosing the site, or was the scientific team more responsible?
The collider geometry was determined by the physicists because they had very specific trajectories for the particles that they wanted to accelerate. And the collider itself was a big oval, 54 miles in circumference and about 17 miles from its northernmost point to its southernmost point. But they had super elevations in the thing, very complicated geometry, and basically the location of Waxahachie was chosen not just politically, but because of the geological structures there. It's solid limestone when you get below the ground. So that was the major impetus for the location.
Did that make it easier to dig through?
No, it's very hard because you're tunneling and blasting all the time. The tunnel was huge, the shafts going down to it. There were 17 of them dug when the project was canceled. They were, if you can imagine, an elevator shaft about the size of a house that was 110 feet to the top of the tunnel, and then another 80 feet to the floor of the tunnel. And when you got in there, it was like being in Grand Central Station.
Were you disappointed when the project was canceled?
Oh, very much so. Very much so. We most of the engineering firms in the North Texas area were vested in that project. We probably had revenue stream out 10 years beyond where it was canceled.
Do you have any insight into why it was canceled?
It was pure politics again. Congress was not willing to come up with the money to keep funding it. It was a very expensive project. It would have been something on the magnitude of sending a man to the moon, which we did in the 60s. But if you look at the rewards we reaped out of that program, there's no telling how much technology came out of the moon program, and I think we would have reaped the same kind of rewards out of the super collider.
What do you think this says about America's role in the scientific world?
I think we've abdicated our role in the scientific world, and we've let the Europeans take the lead now.
So what do you think the superconducting super collider, if completed and if the funding were not cut off, hypothetically, could have done for the United States image in the scientific community, and not just that, but just for the overall advancement of science worldwide?
Well, as far as prestige goes, it would have definitely been a feather in the United States cap to have supported that level of science research. Had we completed it, it would have done a lot to further the cause of physics research and science in manufacturing processes as well in the United States, simply because of the sheer magnitude of the project. The fact that it didn't come to fruition is frustrating at a lot of different levels.
Assuming seeing as the U.S., they scrapped the project, and so now we are not associated with a superconducting super collider or a large hadron collider or whatever. But the country that is now associated with that, of course, is Sweden. So, what do you think? What impact do you think this really has on what does this tell us about the emphasis that America puts on science and the basic influence of science in our American society today?
It's yet another indication of a lack of emphasis on effective education. It looks to me, and I think to quite a few other people, that the educational process that we've relied on for years and years is becoming increasingly ineffective. Science, basic math, the pure science skills and the thought process that goes into it just aren't being supported. And it's because I wish I could put my finger on a particular reason, but from a phenomena point of view, countries like China, India have developed college curriculums that exceed the capacity to teach in the United States. And whereas when I went to college in the 70s, we had lots of foreign students that would come to United States universities to get the level of education here. It's not so anymore. It's dwindling. China's got colleges that are as good or better. In fact, most of the well-developed countries in the world have got colleges that are as good or better than anything in the United States. And it's ominous, honestly. Last time I checked, about 78% of the manufacturing jobs in the United States are being outsourced to China, to India. India's developing software for pennies on the dollar compared to the folks that are working here. Mm-hmm. And it's, from a balance of trade point of view, pretty awesome things that are going on. And throughout history, the people, the countries that had a focus on science were the countries that were world leaders. And the way that bodes in my mind is the United States, if it hadn't already lost its leadership position, is going to pretty quickly unless we figure out a way to turn it around.
Maybe part of the reason they're ahead of us in all this stuff now.
China, they're catching up, and I wouldn't say they're ahead.
They're pretty fast paced. So.
It ain't going to take them long, and I'm going to tell you why. I sat next to the president of Changsha University for dinner one night, and I looked at him and asked him, how does it feel to know that China will be the next superpower? And he looked at me like I had three heads, and he said, China will never be the next superpower. And I said, why do you say that? He said, because we have no middle class. He said our middle class left and went to the United States, and Canada, and everywhere else, and that's where they took their brains. They took their brains to other countries. But guess what's happening, finally?
They're going to come back.
They're coming back.
They learned everything they can.
They're coming home. And when we lose the Asian influence on science and technology in this country because they're going to go home, you better think about how that's going to be the demise of science in America. That scares me. Because they have excellent work ethics, they're great problem solvers, they're creative, they're copycats, but they're creative, and it'll be a big loss. I think it'll be a huge loss.